Welcome back. Still tuned in to News and Views with myself, Salailo Makwidi. The time is 4 minutes before the top of the hour, and we're going to be switching gears now to a very, very important topic. As the global order, bends under the weight of new rivalries and old powers, Africa stands once again at the crossroads of history. We're commemorating Africa Month, and this Africa Month has a very important and I think interesting theme: justice for Africans and people of African descent through reparations. That's the theme. We are reminded not only of the past injustices, but of present day challenges that continue to shape the destiny of our beloved continent of Africa. And I think in a world increasingly defined by a new Cold War, dare I say, not of ideology, but of technology and trade and influence, African nations are being courted and coerced by competing global powers. The United States of America being one, China being the other. They're seemingly locked in a fierce rivalry that has global consequences. Yet Africa's voice and, most importantly, its urgency remains underrepresented in decisions that affect our future, Africa's future. From the Belt and Road Initiative to the expansion of BRICS Plus, Africa finds itself at the center of strategic interest, but it is truly at the center of power. That's the question we're asking. Can the continent use this moment where its existence seems to be of importance more than ever in its history? Can we use this moment to assert our sovereignty, to demand reparative justice, and most importantly, to define a path on our own terms, to decide on our own terms what we want our future to look like? We're going to be asking these very, very important questions with Dr. Olumide Adetokunbo Fafore, a respected researcher, political scientist, and PhD holder in politics and international studies from the University of KwaZulu-Natal. And we'll speak to him about what it truly means for Africa to seek justice, not just in rhetoric, but in global governance, in trade, in diplomacy, in influence, and all of the other important aspects of existence. And Dr. Fafore is joining us via our virtual platform. Doc, thank you so much for joining us. Really, really appreciate you giving us your time. And good morning.
Yeah, good morning. And I'm also very happy to be here. And you also said a lot with regards to the future of Africa, maybe as a continent, as a united front. And if you look at it, Africans has been a scramble for the rest of the world, from the Berlin conferences to the formation of the African Organization of African Unity. Africa has always been a divided front. Even when it was transformed to the African Union, it has also been a divided front because different countries, different blocs were still hiding under the ideology of the British, the French, and other colonial masters. And African unity or African organization became only a talking shop, maybe a bureaucratic talking shop where African leaders gather, they talk, but the lack of political will and inadequate funds has always hindered most of Africans' programs and African prospects. And if you are looking at it now, we are entering into the fourth industrial revolution, where technology is the and you can see the latest tariffs and implementations or executive orders from the United States. We can see the development in China. We also see the division of different organizations like the BRICS. We have seen the integration of the ECOWAS. So I think there's still prospect, especially in a month where in May, which is a significant month, where we celebrate Africans' rich cultural heritage and economic prospect. But one thing still lack. We have to go back to the spirit of Pan-Africanism if we want to really to achieve a strong African front. And if you look at the decisions made by Africa, African country has always been speaking the voice of other countries, like speaking the voice of the United Nations, speaking the voice of the United Kingdom, speaking the voice of France. But we are beginning to see a resurgence of great African leaders, like people like Kwame Nkrumah, Nelson Mandela, and the rest, with what we are seeing in Burkina Faso, in other countries. And to me, I think Africa has the potential to dominate in the coming emerging world order. But without unity, without Africa forming the Federation of African Countries, because that has been what people like Nkrumah has always been after. People like Gaddafi have always been after. That Africa needs to unite. Africa needs to embrace the Africanism of those old days. Because if Africa cannot speak with one voice, then we all will continue to be a pawn in the hands of the greater powers. Like you can see now, in what is happening in the world now. There's a trade war between the American and China. Where is Africa in this trade war? Because most of these mineral resources we're talking of, most of these agricultural products we are talking of, are coming from Africa. So it's time we need to stand and have a voice, a common voice. And that is the only way we can be able to move into the next century, into the next coming technology. Because the world is changing and technology, like you said, rules the world. And if you look at African history, it has been an history of struggle. It has been an history of war. Right now, I think peace and security happens to be like one of the richest countries in the world, one of the countries that has abundant mineral resources. But what is happening there is war, fragmented conflict. If you look at places like Sudan, if you look at places like the Sahel region, where terrorism and everything is, and I think before it was a policy of divide and rule structure, but now it's a policy of fragmental conflict, which has not allow Africa to achieve its full potentials. And again, the problem about the African continent is this: we have laudable documents, laudable programs, laudable policies, the peer review mechanism. If you read those documents or you go through those documents, you see those are things that would have enhance further cooperation, enhance our economic potentials. But we have this idea in Africa of maybe it's because of the different African countries. If the leader of a particular country is no longer in power, his policies, his programs are being thrown to the dustbin, and every leader now tries to bring in different new policies. So Africa still have a long way to go. Like somebody used to said, like used to said, that Pan Africanism should be the symbol. Africa must unite, must be the slogan. If we do not unite, and we begin to, you can now see the division of BRICS now. BRICS is being controlled by Russia, it's being controlled by China. We have the United Nations, we can say, is also has become what we call a talking shop, like the African Union, where leaders just gather, make laudable speeches, go back to their country, and because it's being controlled by the great world powers. It's being controlled by the United States. It's being controlled by the United Kingdom. It's being controlled by China. It's being controlled by France. It's being controlled by the great power. So right now, Africa does not have a voice, and the only way Africa can have a voice is for African countries to come together and unite. Okay, like for instance, you can see the issue of South Africa taking Israel to the ICJ. The ICJ before has been a place where African leaders have been tried for crimes against humanity, for people like Charles Taylor, the war in Sierra Leone, the war in Liberia, the war in Congo, and the rest. But now, a country like South Africa has taken that bold step. So Africa needs to support one another to take collective decision in issues of technology, in issues of economy, in issues of global peace and security, achieve our full potentials. And again, one thing about this is this. I think what Professor Ali Mazuri that said, Africa has dual personality. You understand? For instance, I'm an African. I want to become an European. I'm an African. I want to become an American. And I'm
Mm,
African. I want to become a Chinese. So, except we go back and understand that, first of all, we're Africans and we all share the same similar culture, although it's very diverse. You understand? And secondly, this is the second largest continent in the world and the most beautiful continent in the world. A lot of huge potential resources are here. So we need to unite. We need to come
mm.
together and form a stronger African unity that can speak and can be respected across the world.
Very, very important. The issue of unity. And it's coming as a very, very strong theme in what you're saying. I want to touch on, the geopolitical agencies on the continent. Previously, the original non-aligned movement once served Africa strategic leverage of some sort. Today, as you mentioned, we're seeing the emergence of the BRICS Plus, and it almost feels like multilateralism has re-emerged. Do you believe these platforms offer genuine avenues for reparative justice, which is, at the forefront of this year's theme of Africa Month, or are they simply a reshuffling of global hierarchies, if I can put it that way?
Yeah, I think, like you said, I think we can call it the proliferation of international organizations. And even within the BRICS members or within the G20 and other various economic and political organizations that Africa belongs to, Africa is not a major player. Maybe if
Mm,
you look at BRICS now, we have South Africa, yes, we have India, we have Brazil, we have Russia, we have China. But the decisions are those decisions for the growth and development or the enhancement of peace, cooperation, and unity in Africa. Then, except or African leaders, are they going there to defend the interests of the global powers? So the question still lies on this. Yes, it's good for diversity. It's good for economic transformation. But are we being respected as a voice?
mm.
The situation that transpired where African leaders are being packed into one bus,
I remember
and
that.
yes, you can see,
It was
except one,
it was at the funeral of the Queen of England, if I'm not mistaken,
yes,
where
it was the
other
coronation of
heads of states were in private
King
cars
Charles.
and yes,
Thank
yes, yes,
you.
I
The
remember.
other head of state were coming with
Private
uh,
cars.
private cars. They were being ushered in glory form. All the president, but American leaders were packed into one long bus.
Mm,
So it seems that we continue to beg the other countries. You understand? And we are in a situation of begging. The only way where we can, what you said, is for us. Yes, we have the roots. We have the colonial roots. We cannot forget the experience of colonialism. We cannot forget the British in West Africa. We cannot forget the French in parts of the world. We cannot forget what happened in Congo and the rest, Belgium
mm,
and the rest. You understand? The assimilation, everything is still there. But we still need a very stronger African organization that represent Africa first, that put Africa first. We came out with one program, they said African solution to Africa problem.
yeah.
What has that policies achieved? We need to look into our own local mechanism. Look at, you can see for the European Union, there were a series of wars in Europe before they now came together as a union, and they formed institutions that united them. We saw them bringing out the euros. We saw them having the North Atlantic Treaty Organization to protect and secure the security and borders of Europe. So
Mm,
we still need to do more. We
mm,
need to take. We need to speak as a united front. Okay, let's look at the issue of Libya, for instance. When other African countries were saying, "Oh, this is a local thing. We need to apply African solutions to it." Some African countries went there to vote against Libya. So we still have a long way to go. And the only way we can achieve is if African leaders, thank God we're having somebody like Traore in Burkina Faso and other African leaders that are beginning to see that Africa comes first and beginning to say this, we have the resources. We might not have the technology, but we have the resources. So there has to be what we call comparative advantage. Bring your technology. We bring our resources. We sit down on the round table, and we become equal partners. I think that is just the only way.
I want to touch a bit on, I think, something that you just mentioned. I want to pick your brain on, African leadership, focusing on Ibrahim Traore most importantly, because he seems to be, a new generation of emerging young African leaders that seem to think differently about the direction that the continent should be taking, and most importantly, the relationships that we have with the former colonial rulers of the continent. How should we assess a leader like Ibrahim Traore? Granted, he's come up with some very, very innovative, some very, very, African solutions to Africa problems, as you've mentioned. But there are other concerns, for the mere fact that there hasn't been an election that has been announced in Burkina Faso since the coup. And could that be a reminiscence of previous African leaders that we've witnessed? We all know them. There's a long list of African leaders that emerged. We thought, they could be a turning point for their respective countries and for their continents, but ultimately we saw tyranny unfold, essentially. So, how should Africans, how should the people of Burkina Faso, the Burkinabe, read into Ibrahim Traore, obviously taken from the lessons of previous African leaders who essentially damaged and plagued this continent far worse than it already was by the former colonial rulers?
Yeah, I think, because presently Africa has one of the largest young population all over the world, and most Africans, especially the ones that have traveled across the globe, schooled all over the world, are mostly in the younger age. And most of them have now come back to their country. And they now seen that, I was in France, I schooled in France, I schooled in London, I schooled in Germany. And they saw the development, they saw the transformation, they saw the leadership. And most of them now are now having the same idea that this can also happen in my country of origin. But the essence still lies on the issue of leadership, like you said. Ibrahim Traore came in with like the step full of somebody like Thomas Sankara, especially in a country that is being ravaged by poverty, one of the most poorest countries in the world, being ravaged by terrorism, being ravaged by bandits, and every form of fragmented conflict. But he has brought a level of change. He has brought a level of hope because among the youthful African, Traore represents the symbol for a better Africa. But like you said, democracy still remains the best form of governance, and dictatorship, because everything starts from let me do this, let me bring in good ideas, let me force this on the people, and before you know, the person becomes a dictator or a tyrant. Yes, and Traore has been going through a lot of assassination attempts, especially from neighboring countries, like countries that have different ideas, like Cote d'Ivoire and the rest. But to me, I believe what he needs to do, and he needs to, like you said, most other African leaders have ravaged the continent and even done more ills than what colonialism did. So what I feel, my opinion is this: you cannot say you are the owner of the country and let you be the symbol of the country. And what Traore needs to do, bring in your reforms, allow democracy to thrive. do what you can do, and let there be a government selected by the people. You understand? Because for him staying put in power, he might end up becoming another Mobutu Seko. He might end up bringing another Paul Biya. He might end up being most of those presidents like Idi Amin that led their country into further instability and insecurity. So he's somebody that is being loved, but we expect him to bring in democratic reforms because democracy is the best form of government. We learn from our mistakes. So he needs to allow the people and to allow the wave of democracy to to blow in Burkina Faso, and that is how Burkina Faso can also achieve its full potentials.
You speak about democracy, and usually when we have this conversation, with some colleagues and some friends, especially when we talk about Ibrahim Traore, and I mentioned the fact that, well, I have nothing against him. In fact, I hope that he is what he says he is. And the one issue for me that I'll bring up is, of course, democracy. Let's vote. As a South African, these are the fundamentals for me of what is a start of a working country. Essentially, first, let's vote. Let people have a say on who gets to govern. And some people will say, well, what if democracy is not an African concept? What if we need to start thinking differently about how we govern ourselves? Democracy is a foreign concept. We have our own ways of governing ourselves here on the continent, and maybe we need to go back, to those ways, those pre-colonial ways, those ways that are not influenced by Eurocentric kind of thoughts. How do you respond to that, Africa, and how we interact with the concept of democracy, which has failed, to be honest, in most parts of the continent? We've not seen democracy thrive as a system, as it would naturally do in other parts of the world, and as you would expect it to, as the most perfect form of governance, as touted by many to be.
Yeah, you have a big point there. Democracy has failed in Africa, and I think democracy failed in Africa because when Africa were being decolonized, and where the colonial masters were imparting or bringing in their forms of system of governance, which most African country embrace. Our system of democracy is different from the system of democracy of other countries in Europe, in America, and the rest of the world. Because if you look at pre-colonial Africa, like you said, it was mainly an autocratic system of kings, chief, clans,
Yeah.
where even the people of traditional Africa or indigenous Africa never had a say. Everything was being decided by the kings, by the chiefs, and everything. So I think what really transformed is that African democracy became a mixture of pre-colonial system of Africa, especially what we call the issue of leadership, where a leader sees himself as a form of entitlement and derives a form of maybe the god of that country. Do you understand? For instance, now, except one or two countries, maybe in South Africa, I can say, for instance, is a good example of democracy. And why democracy is working in South Africa is because it's a collective democracy, representative democracy. The winner does not take all.
Mm.
You see, South African election, for instance, you know how it works. For if the ANC have every party that have a number of votes are entitled to go to the parliament. So every form of political party has a little or a bit of say in how the country is being run. And that is why democracy has failed in other African countries, because a political party, for instance, dominates vote of election, dominates the parliament, dominates the municipality, dominates the executive
form. So it now becomes a one-man show, a one-party thing, and that is why democracy has not worked. Because Africa is always, even within the family, like the man, the head of the family, of the father, believes he has every entitlement to everything in there. So that traditional system of governance and the mixture of the democratic form of governance, the only thing that can make Africa good, whether we revert back to pre-colonialism, is good governance. Without good governance, we cannot achieve our full potential. It's just good governance. Good and representative governance.
It doesn't matter which shape or form it comes in, what package it is packaged, but just good governance. Whether it's a dictatorship, it's an autocratic, it's a democratic kind of leadership. I think you're so right. Africans just want good governance, and they essentially
like Paul Kagame, the president of Rwanda. There's a lot of human rights complaint against him. There's a lot of autocratic absolutism against him. But look at Rwanda today. See the growth, see the development, see the transformation. Yes. So everything lies on good governance and good leaders.
China also, one can argue, they are not a democracy. They are a socialist state of some sort, and they seem to have figured it out. I want to touch lastly on a very, very important point, the issue of trade, and who South Africa does business with. There was a trade war, or there's a trade war that's currently ongoing, as you mentioned, between the United States and China. And it comes at a time where Africa is being told to, number one, trade within itself, try to open the borders and do more business amongst ourselves, because we essentially have everything we need, from South Africa to Egypt, Cairo. If we can intertrade and interchange resources, we don't need the rest of the world. That's one aspect. The other aspect is Africa is told to look for other avenues, other friends to trade with, looking at how the United States of America and Trump 2.0 have went about treating Africa with those tariffs imposed on the continent, the cutting of US aid, and all of the politics that went on since he came back. One partner that Africa seems to be warming up to is China. Africa trades more with China than any other country in the world, yet many of its infrastructure, its debts, and its resource agreements raise concern. How do we go about assessing this relationship with what we considered as an alternative, which is China, from the former, rulers who came into Africa and they've plunged it and went on to exploit us in the different trade deals that we have. We now have China in place. How do we assess this economic relationship with them? And can we be in a place to better negotiate reparative terms with China compared to everyone else?
Yeah, you see, if you look at I think China happens to be the most populated country in the world. And if you go to most economic hub, maybe in Nigeria, in South Africa, in Algeria, in countries that have huge economic potentials, you see a lot of Chinese malls, Chinese shops, Chinese products, Chinese companies everywhere, involving in infrastructure development, in roads, in railways, in oil business, in ports. But to me, I believe that the Chinese are a better trade partner, because their policies are strictly business, not politics or domination or economic colonization. They are in Africa, and if you see, I think they're one of the best, the biggest trading partner with countries like South Africa, countries like Nigeria, countries like Egypt. You understand? And but the issue still lies on the dollar, because the dollar still dominates. That is the easy mix of global finance in trading. And the balance structure between America and China. China have the technology. They have emerging technology. So every country in the world, even Africa, might have all the resources in the world. We have agricultural products, we have mineral resources, but we need that technology advancement. We need that technology exportation, export from China to be able to utilize those our resources, make our agricultural products for us to for Africa to be able to generate the necessary income or the necessary finance for its further development. So we cannot, we need the China. And I think to me, they are a better trading company. And you see most of the projects going on in Africa are loans, soft loans from China. So we are seeing a world that China becomes the major trading partner of African countries. And if you look at it, for instance, Africa also needs to open up its border, not in terms of immigration, not in terms of migration, in terms of trade. You understand? Meaning that I can be able to move in my chickens from Burkina Faso to Chad. I can begin to move my goods or my products from Tanzania, because Tanzania of recent banned some agricultural products from South Africa before they now had a further agreement. But Africa needs to enter into any trading agreement on equal terms, on comparative advantage, and beneficial to the various African countries, not an issue of a master and a slave. That is just my opinion.
No, definitely. And I think we're going to do on that powerful note, Prof. Thank you so much for giving us your time. Really, really appreciate the eye-opening, insightful conversation. And happy Africa Month.
You too. I wish you. Thank you so much.
There you go, Dr. Olumide Adetokunbo Fafore. And yeah, very eye-opening, very important conversation that needs to be had, because Africa is not just a continent, man. It's a cradle of civilization, a mosaic of cultures, a land of vast natural wealth and beauty, a wellspring of resilience. And as Nkwame Nkrumah once said, Africa is one continent, one people, and one nation. And unity, as Dr. Fafore mentioned, is the only thing standing in our way. You know, we can bargain with the world a bit better when we present a united front, especially now as we stand amid rising global tensions and these new political alignments that are happening. We must remember that our future will not be written for us. It will be written by us, and we can only do that if we are equal. So yeah, let's protect its beauty, its people, and its promise. Let us fight, not with weapons, but with unity, vision, and courage for the Africa that we all deserve. Because it's clear, Africa is not just the past, it's also the future. This is News and Views. We're going to take a short break. We'll be with you after this.